Right, let's get into some of the news. And you don't know where to start, when to stop with all the news coming out. There's literally bedlam going on in all countries. Factions playing here, mercenaries playing there, threats going on, and counter threats. You have no idea. Anyway, the first news is the DNC, Democratic National Committee, last Friday served a lawsuit against WikiLeaks. Now, this plays into Assange, and we're going to see an extraordinary name outed as playing a role when this comes out. And they want to serve the lawsuit to the exclusive group that has thus far been unresponsive, and CBS News first reported last month, and the DNC filed a motion with a federal court in Manhattan requesting permission to serve its complaint to WikiLeaks on Twitter, of all places, a platform the DNC argues that the website uses regularly. Anyway, they filed the lawsuit in April, initially against the Trump campaign, Russian government, and also WikiLeaks, alleging a massive conspiracy to tilt the 2016 election in Donald Trump's favour. Now, all of the DNC's attempts to serve the lawsuit via email failed, and the DNC said last month's motion to the judge, which ultimately was approved, and the lawsuit was served through a tweet from a Twitter account last Friday by Cohen Milstein, the law firm representing DNC in the suit, with the intent of serving it. And essentially, they're trying to pressure, or Ann is, and Obama and others, hinted at last week, into the people of Ecuador revoking Julian Assange's citizenship, and so then throwing him out of the embassy. At that point, they think they're going to drag him over to America and spout a load of lies, which will be blackmailed out of him, because the truth is there was no collusion and there is no Russian conspiracy. And in fact, actually there was. That was done by the Democratic Party, not Mr. Trump. So that's what they're trying to do. And like most other things, that'll fail. So the Federal Reserve last Friday, there's another one, has fined the Citigroup. Of course, that's been changed name now after Kim sold it for $1 over shoddy mortgage documentation practices at its subsidiary. And the Fed said back in 2015, Citi Financial mishandled customers' files as it was preparing to wind down its mortgage servicing business. Yes, indeed, before everything collapsed around them. And the regulator said that the problem occurred in 2015 and was corrected, and Citi Financial exited that line of business in 2017. Yeah. And the Fed also said it was terminating a separate 2011 enforcement action against Citigroup on a separate residential mortgage loan servicing matter, citing sustainable improvements by the bank. In other words, it's not in the same hands. Where are we next? Another sign that the millionaires and billionaires are no longer allowed to circumvent the law. This time the Broadcom co-founder and billionaire Henry T. Nicholas III was arrested in Vegas this week on suspicion of narcotics trafficking after police discovered heroin, cocaine, meth and ecstasy in his suite in the hotel. And Las Vegas police detained him, and a woman by the name of Ashley Fargo Wonder if she's related to Wells de Fargo, as in what the... last Tuesday, the police were called to the room, and the security reported finding contraband in the room, and Nicholas and Fargo were arrested and booked on suspicion of trafficking, and both have since been released. So, with being a billionaire, he can make bail. One wonders whether he'll go missing. So, not a surprise. We did tell you the strategy of what would happen, and this guy's name was mentioned. And in quite a remarkable attack on a political opponent, Mr. Trump decided he'd had enough of John Brennan, the CIA director under Barack Obama, and revoked his security clearance, citing what he called Mr. Brennan's erratic behaviour. Now, this was threatened last month, and also other Obama administration officials, including Susan E. Rice, James Clapper, and I suspect they won't be too far behind. In fact, from what I gather, there is 9 to follow. At the time, Ms. Sanders said that Mr. Trump was considering doing it because they politicised and in some cases monetised their public service and security clearances. Interesting terminology, read between the lines on that. Mr. Trump has questioned the loyalties of national security and law enforcement officials and dismissed some of their findings, particularly the conclusion that Moscow had intervened in the election. I'm getting tired of saying that. Here's another name that's going to get increasingly popular in the portal people. For the new members, that's called the mainstream media. The water treatment was bureaucratic jargon for waterboarding, and 11 newly released top-secret cables from the time that Gina Haspel, who's now the new CIA director, oversaw the base, provided at times graphic details on the techniques the agency used to brutally interrogate Al-Qaeda captives. Agency leaders and officers were racing to uncover what they feared were large-scale plots against the United States in the chaotic months and years after the September 11 attack. I warned about Haspel. I'm not thinking she's going to last long, but she will expose certain others. Mr. Trudeau and his circle gets narrower by the day as more and more of his associates gets exposed. Here's another one. Christopher Charles Ingvaldsen, a long-term close friend of Justin Trudeau, has been found guilty of child pornography charges after being caught directing an international pedophile ring. Mr. Ingvaldsen pled guilty in BC Provincial Court in Vancouver to accessing child pornography and possession of child porn. Now, initially he was charged with 2 counts of importing or distributing child pornography, and at the time he was charged, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police said that 11 members of the pedophile ring in 3 countries, Canada, Australia and the UK, had also been arrested in those countries. Now, Mr. Trudeau and Ingvaldsen have been closely linked since their days as roommates at college, and after completing their teaching degrees, they were both accepted to teach at West Point Grey Academy. Oh dear. Look that up. An elite Vancouver private boarding school. Yes, indeed. So, Mr. Trudeau's close associates are getting pulled in by the month, it seems. Maybe one day he'll get pulled in. Now, the big news this week, the chemical giant Monsanto has been ordered to pay $289 million damages to a man who claimed herbicides containing glyphosate that has caused cancer. Now, this landmark case, which is only the first, there will be many more. The Californian jury found that Monsanto knew its Roundup and Ranger Pro weed killers were dangerous and had failed to warn its customers. Now, this was the first lawsuit to go on trial, and of course Monsanto denies that the glyphosate causes cancer and says it intends to appeal against the ruling. The jury had got it wrong. No, actually they got it right. You just don't want to pay. It's as simple as that. And the claimant in the case, groundskeeper Dwayne Johnson, is among more than 5,000 similar plaintiffs across the US, and correspondents say the California ruling is likely to lead to hundreds of other claims against Monsanto, which is now called Bayer, which means Rothschilds. Bayer, Bauer, Rothschilds, all the same. More people deciding they've had enough of what the fun and games is going on, and this time in Romania and the capital Bucharest on Saturday, and there was clashes between demonstrators and riot police that left over 400 injured, and the rallies have been spearheaded by expats who claim that they had been forced to leave the country due to corruption, and the demonstrators carried Romanian, European Union and other flags, and many preferred to sit in the central square protesting the violence. Of course, the riot police were sent out and fired tear gas and water cannons to quell the protesters, claiming later that it was hooligans who started the violence. So another country deciding they'd have enough. The US dollar is going to come under heavy fire in the coming days, as this is going to be a tipping point in many ways. And according to the Russian finance minister Anton Siluanov, he said the US dollar is not a reliable tool for payments anymore in international trade, and payments in national currencies might be used instead. You're going to see a lot more of this. And the finance minister expressed doubt that the internationally recognised currency is reliable, and also said he does not rule out the possibility of switching to national currencies in oil trade. Put two and two together with that. We have significantly reduced our investment in US assets. Yes, they have. They've sold a whole heap of US Treasury bonds off, which is a concern at this point, but it will work is underway to correct many of the issues going on in the financial world. Now, this statement comes after Washington announced plans to target Moscow with a new round of sanctions, which could reportedly include exports of sensitive national security goods to Russia, and the measures come in response to poisoning, according to them, of former double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter in the UK, which all Western nations jumped on board and blamed Russia without providing any evidence. This is a short story that people may want to start looking into, as it smacks of Nexium and other types. A building in Santa Cruz, California, is being converted into a worship space and public brewery by a pro-gay church that plans to donate some of its beer proceeds to Planned Parenthood. Really? Now, Planned Parenthood has offices in the former bookstore Van Hall plans to turn into a brewery by the next month, and a church that serves beer and gives the profits away to places like Planned Parenthood is really exciting to me, the pastor said. Really. I think the pastor's lost the plot. Or perhaps he hasn't. Perhaps it's all part of the plan. So the FBI this week, in the other big political news, finally fired Agent Peter Strzok, who had helped lead the Bureau's investigation into Russian interference until officials discovered that he'd been sending anti-Trump texts. Now, Eitan Goldman, who is Strzok's lawyer, said FBI Director David Bowditch ordered the firing on Friday, and even though the director of the FBI office that normally handles employee discipline had decided Strzok should face only a demotion and a 60-day suspension. But Goldman said the move undercuts the FBI's repeated assurances that Strzok would be afforded the normal disciplinary process. Now, the termination marks quite a remarkable downfall for Strzok, who is a 22-year-old veteran of the Bureau and who had investigated Russian spies in the past. Defence officials also accused of selling secrets to China and a myriad of other important cases. And he was integral to two of the Bureau's most high-profile investigations, the Russian case and the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server while she was Secretary of State. Message from me: perhaps they really need to look at his wife rather than Peter. She's the SCE director, Melissa Hodgman Strzok. She was appointed a couple of days after the Clinton Foundation. To investigate Clinton? No. Melissa Hodgman Strzok has been blocking the FBI's probe into the Clinton Foundation for the past 21 months and counting. I did tell you all a few months back, watch the wives. They're all in it up to the neck. Now, Mr. Trump this week blasted Omarosa Manigault Newman as being wacky after she leaked a secretly taped phone call with him amid promotion of a new book. He called her vicious but not smart, and saying White House Chief of Staff John Kelly considered her a loser. I would say this is more BS-ery, to be quite honest, and it's the next line of distraction after the slapper Daniels, you know. But these books, in case you didn't notice, all come out just before elections, and it's all designed to sway the people sitting on the fence. Most of it is lies and self-fulfilling, and all of it will get found out eventually. So this woman is accusing Trump of using the N-word and being against blacks. And that's essentially what it is, to tip the black vote. So she's using the race card to say Trump said this and Trump said that about blacks to create more division under the banner that only black lives matter. Now, all people's lives matter. Now, what I'm pleased to see in some of the reports and some of the blogs and forums is it seems that the black community are not buying hair and a puppet string holders BS anymore. They fell for Obama. He was going to be their saviour. And you've seen how that turned out for the black people. They actually were worse off. But the reality is the tide has turned on this type of nonsense, and the public are just not buying it anymore. But do expect more of the divide and conquer from Portal people here on in, until they erode away to nothing, which is happening. I'll wait for time. Okay. How far have we got to go? can better skip them too. Tesla. Student loans. Now, this is something we may well look at with the trust once we get the first phase out of the way. There's many more phases to come. But more than 1 million student loan borrowers each year go into default. 1 million per year. And the outstanding education debt in the US has now tripled over the last decade, thanks to Obama and Hillary, and it now exceeds $1.5 trillion in total debt, which sounds a lot, but in real terms that can be fixed, and we will look at it. And it's posing a greater burden to Americans more than car or credit card debt. For many, the payments are proving unmanageable. Yes, that's why they did it. Now, it's forecast by 2023, nearly 40% of borrowers are expected to default on their student loans. And that's when a person has not made a payment towards their education debt in roughly a year. So there's, they call it default when you haven't paid for a year. So there's 1 million people who haven't paid that debt for a year. Wow. Which then triggers it to be sent to a third-party collection agency. Oops. They have no authority, no real authority. The debt doesn't belong to them. And you had no contract with the third-party collection agency. How we can fix with or without the trust the student loan debt is all the big corporations that pay little or no tax, charge them 5% straight off the bat and send the funds and eliminate all the student loan debts. Seems fair to me. They're the ones that's reaped all the profits. 5% is not a lot, but it means a lot to all those people who are struggling with that debt that most of them can never repay, on the reality of most being on minimum wage. So you pay all this money for to be dumbed down to get a minimum wage job. Is it worth going? Doesn't seem like it to me. So that would be a solution. 5% tax on all the big corporations straight off the bat, and send all the funds and eliminate all the student loan debts until it's paid. More fun and games in Afghanistan. That's been going on 17 years. Greatest military in the world, oh my. And the latest conflict and reports about whether or not the Taliban, which it has taken the strategic city of Ghazni between the Afghan capital of Kabul and Kandahar. And it reflects the dilemma and the difficulties that the American forces face today. Well, they wouldn't have any, just bring them home. Simple as that. The concerns comes despite the firepower and technology that the US has applied against an insurgent force, which has taken over more than 50% of the country. And this is despite America having almost completely driven out all of the Taliban when it first invaded back in 2001. So now they've got 50% back. And the battle for Ghazni and indeed the effort to defeat the Taliban in remote areas of the country suggests, notwithstanding the intelligence, technology and communications capabilities at its disposal, is that the US is losing the battle to secure the country. All very reminiscent, I might add, of what happened in Vietnam, is it not? It's like history repeating itself. But one intelligence official recently told the writer of this piece, if the US were to pull out its troops of Afghanistan, Kabul and the corrupt US-installed government there wouldn't last beyond a week. Despite 16 years of the American forces fighting it. So if the troops pulled out, the corrupt US-installed government wouldn't last beyond a week. You know, you can't make this stuff up. So we've got a government and a rogue government in there, and they can't run their own country. The reality is no foreign invader has ever taken over Afghanistan permanently. Like the Viet Cong, the Taliban know that it just needs to wait out the US, seeing the opposition that grew in the US to the Vietnam War, and then the people would pull it back. With the same concerns that are now mounting in Congress, the question is, how long will American forces remain in Afghanistan? Preferably tomorrow. We'll ignore Alex Jones's lawsuit. He's kind of irrelevant. Jones has had his FCC license shut down or temporarily pulled. US Attorney Office in Massachusetts this week announced a $4.9 billion settlement with the Royal Bank of Scotland, resolving federal civil claims that RBS Group subsidiaries in the US misled investors in the underwriting and issuing of residential mortgage-backed securities. Same thing again. This was between 2005 and 2008, and the penalty is the largest imposed by the Justice Department for the financial crisis area misconduct at a single entity under the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery and Enforcement Act of 1989. That particular act allows the Justice Department to seek civil penalties for violations of criminal statutes. And the lawsuit holds RBS accountable for defrauding the people and institutions that form the backbone of our investing community, according to Andrew Lelling, the US Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. Now, despite assurances by RBS to its investors, RBS deals were backed by mortgage loans with a high risk of default. And they said, our settlement today makes it clear that institutions like RBS cannot evade responsibility for the damage caused by their illicit conduct, and serves as a reminder that the Justice Department and this office will hold those who engage in fraudulent conduct accountable. I'm glad you said that, because one hopes that they will go on and investigate and recover the 15 trillion sent by the Federal Reserve to the Royal Bank of Scotland and other UK banks in 2008-2009 period. That bailed them all out with Americans' money. 3 transactions, Pure Heart Investments, Rothschilds, that went to the Royal Bank of Scotland HSBC, Barclays and a few others, Santander. 3 transactions of 5 trillion. I think it was February 2009, if memory serves me correctly. Pope Francis now coming under fire. Not that he's relevant much. The reality is, for people who don't know, Pope Francis is 6 layers down from the top level of the Vatican, which is the Black Pope, Clovenbeck. The Grey Pope is 3. Anyway, he stood in the window of the Apostolic Palace looking over St. Peter's Square this week and blessed the crowds that had gathered for the Catholic celebration called the Assumption of the Virgin Mary into heaven. Assumption. That's a rather interesting terminology that they use there, I think. But the Pope never once mentioned the latest horrific news revealed about his church, that a Pennsylvania grand jury this week just handed down a damning 1,356-page account of rampant abuse that involved 1,000 children, 300 priests, and 70 years of silence. And he said nothing. Now, the people of the grand jury said, "We, the members of this grand jury, need you to hear this," the report began. But there was no sign on Wednesday that Pope Francis was listening. No, they won't. Not once did he offer a prayer for the victims of his own churchmen who have been suffocated under a veil of complicity and shame for decades. Now, the Pennsylvania report outlines decades of violent abuse against both boys and girls, and when some of those girls got pregnant by their priests, they were forced to have abortions. Of course, you all know what happened to the fetus. Alcohol was often used to prime the victims, who were humiliated and made to feel guilty for their predators' sins. And one little boy named George was even made out to act out the crucifixion in the nude while priests took Polaroid pictures they later passed around and sent to online pedopornography sites. The priests used whips, violence and sadism in raping their victims, the report states. And the victims were also given gold crosses to wear, which became a sort of scarlet letter by which other offending priests could identify boys who had already been used and abused. And Pope Francis says nothing. Perhaps the people will have its day, and so will Kevin Annett. He sent out a brief report this week regarding the Ninth Circle cult and the arrest of the Pope. By refusing to respond to the court summons, the accused are declaring their implied guilt pro confesso, as if they had confessed to the charges brought against them. Accordingly, the judgment requested by the plaintiffs is hereby granted, and all 12 of the accused are declared to be guilty of a monstrous criminal conspiracy to abduct, traffic, ritually torture and murder children. A bench warrant is hereby issued for the immediate arrest and imprisonment of the accused prior to their final sentencing, and arrests are planned for Dublin on August the 25th when the Pope visits there. I'm guessing he might pass on that trip, and I'm guessing we may have a new Pope, or it may get cancelled altogether. final news before we go into some bits of intel that's safe to put out. But Alan Lowry, a justice on the West Virginia State Supreme Court, who literally wrote the book on political corruption, Don't Buy Another Vote, I Won't Pay for a Landslide, which he published 12 years ago, that took aim at the sordid culture of grift and graft in his home state. Well, it's all backfired on him, because this week, in an ironic piece to his book, Mr. Lowry found himself at the centre of a political scandal. He and his 3 other colleagues on the highest court in West Virginia were impeached over financial abuses and extravagant spending, such as the $363,000 that Lowry, who faces a 23-count federal indictment, dropped on renovations just for his office. And the way the justice seemed to burn through money was, in the eyes of many, has outraged the legislators and is a clear abuse of power. And this is all coming in a state that's in a bad way, and poor and cash-strapped state, where 18% of the population lives in poverty in West Virginia. And the 11 articles of impeachment passed in the State House last Monday, setting the stage for a trial in the Senate, and they've all been booted. Right, people just not getting away with things anymore. People are being exposed. Banks are being fined, although I wish some of the money would, in fact, actually I wish all the money was going back to the people whose mortgages they misused. Afghanistan's fallen apart. Student loans could easily be fixed with solutions. More nonsense in the portal, people, with books being written and things being said and tweets and texts and all this nonsense. And it's all to cover up, essentially, that they're badly losing the inner war. This is what we've been talking about. I'm going to end on a more positive note before we go into the music break. As after 328 days, 1.5 million customers that lost electricity across Puerto Rico, which caused the largest blackout in US history. It's actually Puerto Rico, not US, but there you go. The government yesterday announced that it's restored power to the last neighbourhood that lost electricity after Hurricane Maria. 328 days to put the electric back on. Why? So, because they thought they could do to Puerto Rico what they did with Haiti. They file liens on the property because the people have lost all the jobs and they can't pay the mortgages or they can't pay the loans. And the vultures come in, like Clinton et al., and put liens on the property and confiscate them. You didn't get away with it as much this time. So I'm happy that the Puerto Rican people have got all the electricity, and some of those that have been living in rather poor conditions in Florida can now go home, hopefully. Right, let's have a music break. We're going to go into the intel. Now, this week, the dark web and the Dinar Land people have been rather noisy. And yet, after the failed payout yesterday, we disturbed the sound of silence.